Thanks for tuning in to the Enchanted Library. Today we're reading What Color is My World? The Lost History of African American Inventors, written by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Raymond Obstfeld, illustrated by Ben Booz and A.G. Ford. Chapter 1. You've got to use your imagination, Mama encouraged us. That's what adults say when something looks really awful, but they want you to try to say something nice anyway. Mama smiled weakly and waited for us to say something nice. And waited. More waiting. Finally, my twin sister Ella shook her head. My imagination must be low on batteries, because all I can see is some creepy old house out of some horror movie. Thank you, Ella, Mom frowned. Then she turned to me. What do you think, Herbie? It's great, Mama. Very roomy. Ella stood behind Mama and made an exaggerated kissing face at me. But the truth was, I kind of liked the old place. I stomped my foot on the wooden porch. Solid, I said, and Mama smiled. Herbie, Ella sang, I am the ghost of losers past. We welcome you to our ranks. Mama ignored Ella and gestured us to the house. It's got 3 bedrooms upstairs, so you'll each have your own room. That'll be a nice change, huh? Ella actually perked up after that. I won't have to smell his skanky socks after baseball practice? And I won't have to listen to your dumb phone calls. Knock, knock, a voice said behind us. Mama turned and smiled. Roger, you're early. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, ma'am. That's the truth, said Mama. You have a list of what I need to pick up? Right here. He pulled out a long, handwritten list from the top pocket of his bib overalls and handed it to Mama. Kids, this is Mr. Mattal. He's a handyman Dad and I met at our church. Roger Edward Mattal, he said, offering his hand. We shook it and told him our names. His hands were roughed and calloused, like Dad's. Even though Dad worked as an executive in a bank with a big metal desk and an assistant, and wore suits and ties and shiny shoes, he still liked to work with his hands on weekends. You two will have to help Mr. Mattal while I get more supplies. She whistled at the list. A lot of supplies. Whew! A lot of supplies. It'll all be worth it, Mr. Mattal said. You'll see. Mom nodded, still staring at the long list. Walk me to the car, she told Ella and me. When we got to the car, she said, You do what Mr. Mattal says, you hear me? We're lucky to have him. Ella patted Mama's shoulder. Relax, Mama. Mama locked eyes with Ella. I mean it, girl. When Mama's car was out of sight, we turned toward the house, and there was Mr. Mattal. I take it you two are a little less than thrilled with your new home. Mr. Mattal had a well-worn hammer in the loop of his overalls. He smelled like the peppermint tea Mama always drinks when she gets home from work. She's a middle school principal, not the school Ella and I go to, thank goodness. We were hoping for something newer, Ella said, like the Covenant Garden homes they're building over on Draper Street. They have a community pool, and a hot tub, I added, and tennis courts. New isn't necessarily better, said Mr. Mattal. If you look closely at this place, you'll see some exquisite craftsmanship. We walked into the house. But you don't see a pool, Ella said. Mr. Mattal laughed. Nope, but you'll see something else. Hepatitis? History. Many people worked across the centuries to make a house like this. This house is the culmination of all human progress. Sounds crowded, Ella said with a snort. Sounds like a museum, I said. Oh, it is, Mr. Mattal nodded. A museum is a celebration of achievement. Your parents' achievement is providing a home for this family, but also a celebration of the history of humankind, the history of America, and the history of African Americans. Ella laughed. African Americans? Unless this is a station on the Underground Railroad, I don't see any African American history. She cupped her hands and shouted up the stairs. Dr. King, are you up there watching MTV with Harriet Tubman? Ella, I said, nudging her, knock it off. There's more to our history than slavery, jazz, sports, and civil rights marches. We know that, Ella said, getting sore. Do you know a lot about African American scientists? Mr. Mattal asked. Ella looked at me. Come on, genius, Ella whispered to me. Name some black scientists. I'm sure I read a few, but I couldn't remember a lot of names. Finally, I said, George Washington Carver. The peanut guy, Ella said with a triumphant look. Amazing man, Mr. Mattal agreed. They called him the Black Leonardo, after Leonardo da Vinci. Who else you got on that list? Ella and I looked at each other. Then we shrugged. Mr. Mattal walked over to the wall and flipped on the light switch. Overhead, a bare light bulb burst ablaze with light. "Who invented the light bulb?" he asked. "Thomas Edison," I said. "You gonna tell us he was black?" Ella said. "It was a trick question," Mr. Mattal said. "No one invented the light bulb." What? Ella and I said at the same time. "Oh, Edison had a lot to do with bringing us the light bulb, but no one invents anything. Not by themselves." "Then how come all the history books are filled with the name of inventors?" I asked. "It's easier for people to remember one name, and easier for teachers to test you on only those names. In truth, all inventors only improve on what's come before them. They should be called innovators rather than inventors. See, inventing is like standing in a bucket brigade. People stand in a line that stretches from water source to a fire, and they pass buckets of water up the line. The last person in line throws the water on the fire and gets all the credit for putting out the fire. Inventors are like the people in that line, each one contributing, but the one who throws the water gets the credit as the inventor." I pulled out my blank journal tucked in my back pocket and started scribbling what he said. I even drew a bucket brigade. My whole life is in journals. I have more than 400 of them, all stacked neatly in my bookcase in chronological order from the time I was 5. Sir Isaac Newton once said, "The apple proves gravity guy," Ella said. "Right," he said. "If I have seen farther than others, it is by standing on the shoulders of the giants," meaning that whatever he achieved, it is because of what he learned from all the great scientists that came before him. "So what does the light bulb have to do with African Americans?" Ella asked. The edge had gone from her voice. Mr. Mattal grinned. "Ever heard of Lewis Latimer?" We shook our heads. "Let me ask you this. What color is electricity?" He flicked the light bulb on and off. I thought for a second. "White?" "It's yellow," Ella scoffed. "Lightning looks white when it flashes," I reminded her. "Yeah, well, I don't think that this electricity," Mr. Mattal interrupted, "is black." "Black?" Ella and I said at the same time. We both stared at the light bulb. "You sure your glasses just aren't dirty?" Ella said. "This city gets its electricity from the nuclear power plant. In fact, 20% of all electricity in the U.S. comes from nuclear energy. That is, thanks to Dr. Henry T. Sampson, who invented the gamma electric cell, which makes it possible to convert nuclear radiation into electricity." Ella looked at me. "How come you didn't know that, Thomas Nerdison?" I shrugged. "Good question. Why didn't I?" "Speaking of Thomas Edison," Mr. Mattal said, "you ever hear of Granville T. Woods?" Ella and I shook our heads. He was known as the Black Thomas Edison because of all of his inventions. In fact, Edison even tried to hire Woods. Alexander Graham Bell's company bought Woods' telegraphy invention. "Black electricity," Ella chuckled. She grabbed my journal out of my hands and started scribbling notes. "You are going to love this next part," Mr. Mattal said. He leaned forward as if he was about to tell us a deep, dark secret. Ella and I leaned forward too, listening. He picked up a broom in each hand and tossed it to us. "Get to work." He walked out of the room, but we could hear his laughter echoing in the next hallway. As soon as he was gone, I grabbed my journal back from Ella and started writing down everything he told us. "You're crazy if you think I'm doing all of this sweeping while you scribble away," Ella said. "I don't want to forget what he said. I want to find out more later." She snorted and started sweeping, then stopped and snapped her fingers at me. "Give me some paper too, just to make sure you get it right." If you'd like to read Ella's fast facts about Dr. Henry T. Sampson and Granville T. Woods, go ahead and click the link down below. You'll also be able to see Herbie's notebook of Lewis Howard Latimer. And tune in next week to read Chapter 2. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Eyecatching Dani, and I'm here to read your Enchanted Library.